Ladies and gentlemen, we have now a good time to also discuss. I think it was good, Claire said in the beginning that discuss is something for learning, and this is now time for you to bring up questions and comments and to discuss with the five panelists. So I'd like to invite anyone from the floor, if you'd like to come up with any questions. There is from here. You're welcome. And please, it's very good, because there are many new people in the room, if you can also state your name, please.
Yeah, Otsura Niwa, Main Commission. And for the last talk, Dr. Copplestone, basically environmental people tends to think environment as standing alone. But there are cases in which environmental radioactivity management has a lot to do with human life, community life. Like freshwater fishery people will be very much affected by the free cesium level in a maybe stream and maybe lake or something like that. And also some of the water being used for irrigation purpose, and through this cycle, the production cycle, it's going to affect the community and its economy, and also stigma and all kinds of things. So I think, it's about time, at least Fukushima indicated this kind of situation happens. So it's about time that environmental protection may not be standing alone, but something to do with our real life.
Okay, is that working? Yeah, I completely agree with you, and I think we should actually stop thinking about the system of radiological protection in two halves and start thinking about it as the single system that we're actually looking at, so we can address some of these issues. I didn't say it when I showed the graphic that Carl Magnus also showed this morning. To me, there are just slight differences in the way you do the assessments and so on, but the overall philosophy, the approach and everything else is about being able to communicate where we are with the radiological protection, what we know about the impacts on wildlife as well as humans. If there was one piece that we perhaps haven't covered, it's the interlink between the environmental impacts on wildlife species such as fish and the potential for the food chain transfer to humans. We don't tend to cover that in many assessments at the moment, but that's something we should be able to cover with an assessment-based approach. But yes, I completely agree with you. Environmental protection should be completely embedded in all our thought processes when it comes to dealing with radioactive contamination.
Thank you very much. Are you happy with the answer? Yes? And there is one question over here.
Thank you. My name is Eduardo Galego from the University of Madrid and member of Committee 4. And I would like to start by thanking Mrs. Sando for the real lesson we have received today from you. I think you have put exactly the recommendations of ICRP where they should be, in the center of people's life. So we are elaborating recommendations to help people to regain, let's say, normal living conditions after such situations like the Fukushima accident. So your experience and your lessons are very relevant to our work. So thank you very much. Second point is that we see also from your talk, that lines are certainly not a solution for this kind of problems. Lines or values are probably necessary to help organizing activities, organizing cleanup, but it's not the solution to separate territories or to separate food, assuming the reference values are the separation between dangerous and safe. This is not the intention. And my question, and this is a personal reflection, is why we are using precise values when the scale of risk is linear. So if we assume linear non-threshold scale of risk, which is linear, why we are using stepwise scales for limits, for reference values, etc. Maybe we should use more gray territories in the regulations, or more linear values. So you may accept an increase in those levels by, for instance, reducing the risk of other factors impacting health of people, like increasing the medical checks, the medical surveys, etc. So this should be better, certainly better reflected in future regulations and in future recommendations. So this is my reflection, and I don't know if somebody from the panel can.
Yeah,
can
thank you very much for your very good comments. Is anyone in the panel who would like to comment on this with the sort of clear values and lines, or if there would be another way to present this that would be understandable? Is anyone who would like to comment on this from the panel? No. I thought so.
No, Eduardo, you are perfectly right. It is not easy, but my feeling is that in such situation, we need some reference level in order to see where we are starting from and where we are going to. And then we need some a scale of numbers, but the key numbers used as a reference level in the sense of ICRP should be choice according to the situation. It is not à la carte, it is to be adapted to the real circumstances, and also take into account the ethical aspect. And of course, in the case, for example, of a contaminated area, the perception is that the radioactivity which is present is not legitimate. And then the right number should be 0. But it cannot be 0, and then it is as low as reasonably achievable, and we enter in the process. In other existing exposure situations, it is more close to, I would say, normal situation practices, but not exactly the same. And then we have to take into account what situation we are dealing with in order to find out the most adapted way. And I repeat, it is not relaxation, it is adaptation to the circumstances, and it is the best way to address the situation in my view. Thank you.
Is there any more comment from anyone in the panel? Well, I also would like to make a comment on this, because this would, of course, be a dream that we could have something very clear and explain. And I think also our community of radiological protection, we need to know that everything we say and do will be interpreted in different ways. And we many times have the role to give recommendations to governments, which I also know it's very hard, because then politics comes into the whole situation as well. And I know in Sweden, when we had the Chernobyl fallout, and there were discussion on how to set the levels. I mean, it was presented, of course, to the minister. There was different possibilities to go for 1 millisievert, to go to 5 millisievert. And in this case, usually the political system or the government, they choose the lower level because they think they give a safe impression, because they are choosing a lower level. But in many cases, as we heard also from the speech, that will have the opposite reaction. It must be so dangerous because you're choosing such a low level. So these are examples that we have seen, and I think I'd like to comment also on Ryoko's very good presentations. There are so many learnings for us, and the presentation was so clear that nobody else I could think could make it so clear for things that we need to work further on. So thank you very much for the question and the comment. And it's not an easy task, but we have lots to do, and we should make the best use of it. So we are not putting another population in the same situation again, with not being able to explain and put lines to their lives which will destroy their lives. Okay, I will now open again for more questions. I'm looking around. I have one there and one there. To start with there, and I have then four over there. Okay, you in the middle down there. Thank you. So maybe also you can raise up the second one and be behind here, so I know who is online. And then there were about 4 people over there. You can be behind that mic. Yes, please.
Just a question for Mike to clarify. Stephen Long from the Australian Radiation Protection and Nuclear Safety Agency. On the circular limits of 10 to the -4 risk of cancer, is that limit derived for all chemicals that might induce cancer, or was it specific for radiation? And if it's not for all chemicals, what is the limits for the other chemicals based on?
The 10 to the -4 is the goal for the cleanup for all the contaminants on the site, chemical for carcinogens. So there are reference values for other endpoints, but you are supposed to sum the risk from all the carcinogens on the site such that the site doesn't present a risk greater than around 10 to the -4. It's not a bright line. It might be as much as 3 times 10 to the -4 in some cases. It's still a very stringent standard. And for chemicals, our risk estimates for humans are based on, for radionuclides are based on human epidemiology largely, but the risk estimates for chemical carcinogens are often much less certain because they're based on animal data.
Okay. Thank you. He is happy with the answer. Thank you. So, next question here.
Thank you. Ted Lazo with the Nuclear Energy Agency. David, you talked about existing situations where the risk to flora and fauna was perhaps above the DCRL and the risk to humans was below the reference level. Under those circumstances, what kind of protective actions would be recommended? And Mrs. Ando, in your consideration, were there any views on protection of animals or protection of plants and non-human wildlife in the Sweatsugi area and in your discussions of what to do and how to manage life as it goes on? Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Will you start, David?
Yeah, thanks, Ted. I think the difficulty with that is that we probably haven't had those conversations yet as to how you'd actually deal with that situation. I think that's something we need to discuss and think about. I think, to me, it's about getting the idea of getting environmental considerations into the assessment process at this point in time. And then we're going to need to think about how you actually turn that into something where we can actually recommend approaches to dealing with those situations. If you want my personal gut feeling on it, we need to talk to the stakeholders, the people living in those areas, and decide on the best approach to take, working with the people involved that may be impacted, or their areas may be impacted. And I think it goes back to the comment about food resources and all the other aspects to it as well that has to be taken into consideration. So.
Yes? Ryoko, you like to comment as well? Ted, would you like to say your question one more time? She is just...
I was just wondering, Ms. Zando, if there had been any consideration in Sweatsugi as things have gone on of non-human biota protection. Are you considering the cranes or the frogs or the plants or the butterflies in your area as something that might be part of your heritage and part of the land's life and what you might consider their needs might be?
日本語で失礼します。まず人が食べるものについては心配というか測定はしていますし心配してます。でそれ以外のものに対しても他の方と話していると心配している方は結構いるんです。ただそれはもう対策を何かできるというわけではないのでそばに線量計を寄せていってそれで違いが出なければ人の体には関係ないんだよっていうような人にどれだけ影響があるのかというところで私たちは判断するようにしています。
Let me interpret what Mrs. Anders answers. In Suetsugi, the major concerns for the effects on fauna and flora have been in the species that will be eaten or consumed by people, and for non-edible plants or non-edible animals, there are some people who are concerned about the effects of radiation, but in reality they have not been they have not been implementing anything specific other than measuring the air dose level, and so the major concerns have been on the impact on the people.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question over here.
Yes, Sasaki, former main commission member from Japan. Jean-Francois mentioned that classifications of area of existing exposure situation. And I think Dr. David Copplestone said that change from emergency situation to existing situation is a pragmatic situation-based decision. So to my knowledge, in Fukushima nuclear plant accident, nobody decided the area of existing situation or change from emergency to existing situation. I haven't found any mention on publication 109 and 111 how it is decided by whom. And I'd like to know what the ICRP recommends to do this after emergency. How you decide or recommend to decide areas of existing situation, and also the change from the time to change from emergency situation to existing situation. That is the question.
David, you want to go, or Jean-Francois first, because it was for both of you. Yes.
Thank you. I will start and you will complete. In planned exposure situation, it is a duty to authority to fix the rule, how to determine the classified area, and it is a duty for operating management to apply. It is relatively simple. In some cases, not. For example, in medical, it is not so simple. But globally speaking, we can say that we can do that, and we have experience for that. And it is very precise. In existing exposure situation, the picture is not the same. For example, you mentioned the case of a post-accident situation. We need some area, we need a kind of zoning in order to manage the situation. What is at stake is the protection of the population in that case, and it is a duty for the authorities to determine this zoning. But which authorities? It is not necessarily the radiation protection authorities. It could be the municipalities, it could be the government as such, but it is based on radiological protection consideration, but not only. And it is why we cannot, in advance, give very precise criteria to make this zoning. It is depending on the circumstance, depending on the severity of the accident, depending also, experience shows that we use the administrative lines, but in some cases it is difficult when just a small part of a municipality is out or in, what could be the decision. Not simple, and again, it is the circumstances which are the driver for that. And it is why ICRP cannot give very strong recommendation about that.
David?
Okay. I agree with what you're saying in terms of the concept, and I think Jean-Francois has explained the reasons for it. I think what I was meaning by it, when it comes to a pragmatic decision, it's about how you change in the communication, how you change in that process of explaining what might happen in terms of what I was talking about for protection of the environment. I think it is very difficult to make that decision, and also who would be responsible. It's got to be the people who, again, coming back to the stakeholders, a collective decision as to when you move from one thing to another. I mean, it's a very difficult approach. I'm not sure if there's much more we can say at the moment.
May I ask additional question? Let me put it a more practical way. I know Jean-Francois knows Fukushima situation very well. My question is, at the moment, is Tokyo in existing exposure situation? How about Seoul now? I'd like to know your personal answer.
My personal answer is not very useful because I have not the hand of the situation. What I would say is that, of course, it's a difficult question to decide when we are leaving from emergency and going to existing exposure situation. ICRP is saying that it is a matter of decision, and this decision should be based on the characterization of the exposure situation. When we are not able to characterize, we are not able to take such a decision. And it is a prerequisite to characterize, and then we can take the decision. But this decision could be taken for a given area and not for the other. It could be different from an area to another, particularly between on-site and off-site first. And even off-site, you could have a gradation in the situation depending on the level of the contamination. And then it is why, again, it is not I would say, a magic decision. It is taken, and for that decision, last point, it's important to involve the stakeholder to take the. It is not to give the burden on the shoulder of the population. It is to take into account the expectation, the real situation, the condition of. It is not sufficient to decide any action. You have to verify if this action could be implemented really and in good condition. And of course, it is very difficult. And of course, it would be easiest if we could have a clear rule, do that and not that, but it is not the case.
Okay. Thank you very much. I really think if it had been clarified, the situation in Japan must be a little bit simpler. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yasu, I think that the situation in Tokyo and in the situation in Seoul is not at all an existing exposure situation, but we can discuss that later on.
Thank you.
I'd like to take the benefit of having Mrs. Ando with us today to ask her another question. Sorry to put some burden on you. First of all, thank you for your contribution today. But also thank you for your contribution in the ICRP dialogue in Fukushima, and also thank you for your contribution in Task Group 93. Your presentation made a clear illustration on the fact that in post-accident situations, stakeholder involvement is a crucial point,
Self-help protection is a very important dimension of the situation. Developing practical radiation protection culture among the population is also a very important point. You mentioned briefly in your presentation the role of some experts that have helped you in Suetsegi. And I think the problem of the role of experts, and specifically radiation protection experts in post-accident situation, is also a very important point. Here is my question. Could you say a few words about your experience with radiation protection professionals over the last 4 years?
皆さんにとっては悲劇的な答えだと思いますが、ほとんど全く役に立った印象はございません。
I am very sorry to say this, but in my personal opinion, radio protection experts have not been very helpful, or I mean, not helpful at all for us.
Thank you very much for a very clear answer. May I also ask you a question? Who do you trust? Who would be the ones you trust?
私のプレゼンテーションの中で、福島県立医科大学の宮崎誠先生の名前を出しましたが、宮崎誠先生はもともとは放射線科の読営医です。放射線防護の専門家ではありません。彼はずっと私たちと一緒にやってきた仲間です。それから前回の2013年のこの ICRP 新報で発表した早野龍吾先生、核物理学の先生です。その先生、放射線防護の専門家ではない専門家の方たちです。
I mentioned the name of Dr. Makoto Miyazaki in my presentation. Dr. Miyazaki is now at the Fukushima Medical University, but until the accident, he was general practitioner as in radiology, and he had nothing to do with radioactive protection. But throughout the 4 years, he has walked every step with us, so we rely on him very much. And another person we rely on is Dr. Ryugo Hayano, who presented in the Dubai ICRP. Although his specialty is nuclear physics at CERN and he is a specialist on antimatters, he has gone out of his specialty to help the people in Fukushima. Those are the people I trust.
Thank you very much. And I wanted to see if I think there was one very far away there. Yes, so that is mostly the last question of the session.
Yeah, Thierry Schneider from CPN in France. I have a question for Mike Boyd. In your presentation, you explained that the calculation, the management is based on risk criteria. My question is how this risk criteria is assessed and in which way you had some debate or interaction with different stakeholders or different experts to see in which way you reach this criteria.
Well, Terry, the risk assessment steps the methodology that we use is really not a product of stakeholder engagement. It's a product of using the models, biokinetic models, and dosimetry and recommendations of such organizations as the National Academy, UNSCEAR, and we're using the data from RERF to come up with risk per unit dose for various organs. So there really isn't an outreach role other than the peer review process that we go through for validating the science. But the Superfund program itself, I should have mentioned this perhaps, but didn't really have time. The Superfund program is intensely focused on stakeholder engagement. When we set a cleanup goal for a particular site, it's always within that range, that band of risk, and it involves working closely with the communities to decide what their goals for the site are, what they want to see the site being used for in the future, how they want to see the resources applied. So there is a stakeholder component in the cleanup decision-making process, but the risk assessment process is more based on peer-reviewed science.
Thank you very much. I have a short question for our guest from the Air France, Gerard, and I hope there is a short answer as well. First of all, are we as frequent flyers at risk, as you see it? And the second question, is the unions involved in pushing these with radiation doses?
Yes, frequent flyers, they have a limit because they can fly more than the hours in the business, and they are the frequent flyers at the same risk of highly exposed pilots or cabin crews. If they fly very many times, or their job involves they have business on the ground also. Yes, if they have at the same risk of cabin crews. Several epidemiological studies have been conducted, and what we notice, an excess of risks of malignant cancer, melanoma cancers. But could it be attributable of a cosmic radiation? We think it's better attributable to ultraviolet lights.
Exactly.
And sun baths,
Yes.
sun baths on the beach and not in the air,
Exactly.
because UV do not penetrate through the windshields of an aircraft.
Yes.
For the female air crews, we notice an excess risk of breast cancers in some studies, but it's difficult to distinguish the factors: cosmic radiation, reproductive status, genetics, and even jet lags.
Oh, jet lags. Oh.
So it's very difficult to say that. What is directly attributable to cosmic radiation? Now we cannot say that. Sure, the unions push very strongly for information and for radio protection of all the whole crew members all over the world, and especially in France. They were at the top of the fight.
Yes. Thank you very much. So it's like a message now that our lifestyle is, of course, very important for our risk, and maybe being frequent flyer on top on certain lifestyle doesn't make much of a difference, but it could be an argument for a higher salary or low working hours. Maybe. Thank you very much. Thank you. Please all join me in thanking this fantastic panel. We have so different type of speakers and topics, and all very relevant to the work of ICRP, and it has been most enjoyable to be here and interesting to listen. Please join me in thanking them all.